Oh, don't worry. These are just to keep the oil off my hands. Anyways, we got ourselves an 81 Honda Cb750 Custom. She's in for a leaky petcock on the tank here. She's leaking fuel, dripping down, which is common on some of these old bikes, especially if you don't use the petcock, then the seals dry out. And also she doesn't get run very often. So the fuel is leaking past the needles in the carburetors, dripping on the motor. Definitely not a good thing when it's hot. So this bike's going to be pretty simple because it's got no airbox, it's got air pods, so quick and easy to pull the fuel tank off, pull all 4 carbs out. God willing, it'll be an easy fix. And customer said we might do a couple oil leaks as well, so we'll see. Let's get the seat off, which is a bolt right here, 10mm head on either side. Pull the seat off, and then I believe it's a 12 or a 13 to lift the tank off the bike. And when you're pulling the fuel line off the back of the petcock, it's nice to have a set of pliers like this so you don't wreck your rubber hoses. Then you can just reach back there, give it a little twist, pop it off. Oh, before we loosen our clamps and take the carburetors off, we're gonna take a long Phillips screwdriver and loosen the cable for our choke, or there's a screw for our choke cable. We can loosen it. We're going to reach in here and loosen our throttle return and open cables with a 10mm nut. Then you're going to loosen all 4 of these carburetor boots with a Phillips screw in this case. And then we can rock our carburetors off. So normally you just pull down on the top and roll them out, but we just rolled this bike in from outside, so all this rubber stuff is pretty cold and hard. We let it warm up overnight and take it off in the morning. Personally, I didn't see any fuel dripping off the petcock, but I do see that the inside of the tank here is wet up top, and it's wet around the nut where it threads on. And the petcock was a little loose, so we're going to tighten up that nut, wipe this off, and see if it stays dry and clean overnight, because that's also a place where it can leak. Well, morning folks. Didn't have very good sleep, but anyways, whatever, we're here. This tank sat here all night. Didn't drip at all on the counter. Petcock itself is dry, so that fixed that problem, tightening up that nut. Carburetors came out real nice and easy now that the rubber warmed up. Now we're gonna flip these carburetors over. Make sure you keep them all in order, your parts. You don't spin nothing around. Take the 3 Phillips screws out of each carburetor bowl. And then we're gonna pop these off. Well, fortunately, the first one looks pretty clean. We're gonna take them all off and then I'll show you a little more. These are actually a non-adjustable float. So you just take a pick on these ones, and these pins are in there nice and loose. You don't have to pound these ones out, unlike some of the older ones. And just pull each one out, and once again, lay everything in order. These are the needles that go up and down in a brass seat to stop the fuel flow. There's a spring needle on the end here. Make sure that those are not stuck. Just push them in, and then have a really good look at the rubber here. These are brand new because I did this bike a couple years ago and it hasn't run much, but have a look at the rubber tips. If there's any sort of a ridge or a groove in there, it's probably a good idea to replace them, but like I said, these ones look really new. When we clean these out, we're going to take a Q-tip, stick it in there and twist it to make sure that if there's any dirt in there, we rub that out of there. Basically just put it in there and twist it. Use a new one for each one. That way you know that surface is clean. And if you look down in there, which it's hard to do with the camera, you're gonna see it polishes up nice. So this left carburetor, when you flip it over, needle had a little bit of dirt on it, so that's probably the culprit that was leaking. Because plastic and gas don't go the greatest together, you want to take a light and shine it through your plastic floats to see if there's any fluid in them. If there's any fluid in them, you got to replace your floats. or you can put them up to your ear and shake them too. Check to make sure there's no leaks in your floats. And for this style needle, it actually hooks into your float and it holds it into place. Then you want to check them to make sure that everything is moving properly. Make sure your bowls are cleaned out. Put your gaskets back into place and tighten them up. All right, before we put our carbs back into the rubbers, we want to hook up our throttle and return cables, and then we'll do our choke cable last. But once we get our cables hooked up, we can push these carbs back into the rubbers. Make sure that your carbs get pushed in there evenly. And sometimes it can be a little tricky, especially if the intake boots are a little older. Make sure that when you hook up your choke cable, you don't pull it too tight, and that your choke flaps here stay horizontal, and there's a little bit of slack on your cable for cornering. We get that back in there and tighten it up. Then go ahead and tighten all your clamps on your boots. These carburetors open and close with vacuum, so it's very important that you don't have any intake leaks, or your bike will definitely not run properly. All right, we've got our fuel tank on here, just sitting loose, not bolted down yet. Here's the moment of truth. We're going to turn the fuel on and make sure that everything's good before we put the rest of the bike together. And if it doesn't leak in 5 or 10 minutes, then we'll call her good. It looks like we got to pull them off one more time. This left carburetor is leaking on the joint where the fuel comes in on the fuel rail. So we're gonna have to pull this left carburetor right off the bank and see if there's an O-ring maybe cracked or dried out. So you can see this brass nipple here. That's where it was leaking, right here where it goes into the left carb. So I'm gonna show you how to disassemble that. Big deal, but this is how we're gonna pull the carburetor off. You gotta loosen these 2 Phillips screws here on the front. And luckily they came apart nice. And there's 2 Phillips screws on top on the back. And luckily those come loose nice as well. Then you're gonna have to carefully wiggle them apart. Keep in mind where the linkage joins between the 2 carburetors will be a little spring. You don't want it to go flying and lose it. The spring you're gonna have to save. So we've got 1 carburetor pulled off. We're gonna have to carefully inspect these O-rings. And as easy as this copper piping comes out, I'm pretty sure those O-rings are dried right out. So now we've got some new O-rings we found on our brass nipple here. And we're gonna slide that in to see how tight it fits. And that fits a lot snugger, so we're gonna take a chance, put that back together, run some fuel into it, see if it stays dry this time. Now that we've got our carburetors assembled, our spring in there again, we're going to put our plates back on, bolting them down. Good idea before you put your screws in there tight to get them all started first. Once you have all your structural plates back in, you still have to put your flap for your choke back together. For that, you might as well put a zip tie around here to hold your choke closed, and then you can lay your plate in there and put the tiny little screws in, but you don't want them rattling out, so put a little bit of Loctite on those retaining screws. All right, so now we're going to get our carbs hooked up again for a second time. Start by hooking up our cables once again, and then we'll shove it into the rubber boots. All right, let's try it again. Moment of truth. Wait a few minutes till the carbs fill up, and God willing, they don't leak fuel again. I'll let you know. Well, it appears that everything is dry now. I got no fuel leaking, so we're going to put the carburetor air filters back on, bolt down our tank and our side covers. Now we're going to fix a leak here behind this cover for the shifter shaft seal with a 19 mil socket. You're going to pull this foot peg off, 10 mil socket, pull your shifter off, and there's 4 8 mil screws. Then, in theory, you should be able to just wiggle that cover off of there and have a look. And there's one 10 mil plate here. This plate, this is a galvanized plate here. It's called a case saver. If your chain ever breaks or comes off, that will protect your main chain case from breaking. And then you just pull this out a little bit and give it a rinse. Now you're going to take a little 1/8 inch drill bit and drill a hole in that seal and take a pick and pop that out of there. Once you get the seal out, you want to take a really soft pick and just feel and see if there's an edge there. If there is an edge there, oh, that's too bad, because then the seal might not seal properly. But just check it out so you know. And when you put your new seal on, make sure you have some masking tape on the splines of the shaft so you don't wreck the oil seal lip. Once you got your seal in, put your bolt back in, the case saver plate, pull the masking tape off, slide your cover back on. Once you get it lined up, and then put your 4 8 mil head bolts back in. Then you can put your foot peg back on and your shift lever. Get those tightened up. Your foot peg is pinned so it won't turn. Make sure you line that up. And that bolt that goes through has a nut on the other side of the bike. I'm sure everybody wants to hear what this 4-into-1 exhaust system sounds like, so let's see if she'll fire up. Alright, thanks for watching as we did fuel leak, clean the carburetors, and an oil leak on this 81 Cb750 Honda. Until next time, thanks for watching, and if you want to see me do anything in particular, put it in the comments. I'll see if I can dig something up and build it for you guys.